There are many points of conversation that have been brought up about the Jurassic Park franchise that have become relatively cliché. Many times a topic is discussed in full after having been duly noted and addressed several years earlier to when the question was fresh and relevant when asked. It's routine to see headlines of articles and view discussion-based media with the same conversations being parroted again and again when the subject of Jurassic Park's dinosaurs is brought up amongst the public. Most of these are filled with the same answers and opinions about the extinct creatures, and rarely is any evidence from the fossil record and paleontological research brought forward when discussing these issues. Now, I'm not using this opening critique as a blanket statement at all, because there happens to be a lot of genuinely honest analyzation brought to the table when these conversations are held, but I feel it's necessary to address one particular topic in full for the sake of the subject becoming clear to those who actually want a concrete answer, and not a generic talking point that's been used for 20 years. We've all heard the statement that the Velociraptors in the Jurassic Park series are extremely inaccurate to their true selves, and usually once this declaration is made, the individual bringing the topic forward expresses a strong disliking to how the Raptors are portrayed in the franchise as a whole. In both the novels and films of this property, as well as the comic books and video games, the Jurassic Park Raptors are always portrayed as 5 to 6 foot scaly dinosaurs, with sickle-shaped claws in their feet as well as a skull and body type reminiscent of a specific creature in the fossil record known as Deinonychus. In the fossil record, there exists an animal known as Velociraptor mongoliensis, which was a small theropod predator covered in feathers that usually weighed in at around 30 pounds and was generally the size of a turkey. This dinosaur is the animal that many detractors of the Jurassic Park films cite as being the real-life version of the stylized Hollywood Velociraptors of Jurassic Park, and the differences of these creatures is pointed out most of the time to make an argument on how unscientific and fictionalized the film's prehistoric life is. If we go back to the origins of the franchise, however, we will find that Crichton's research and designing of these particular animals was done with extensive knowledge of John Ostrom's work on the Deinonychus. Now, John Ostrom is a paleontologist whose work on this particular creature revolutionized the scientific community's thinking on dinosaurs, with the debate of warm-blooded possibilities being a topic of discussion despite the standard cold-blooded reptilian nature of the beast being a common theory beforehand. Crichton met with Ostrom several times while writing Jurassic Park and researched this animal diligently with a paleontologist when designing his antagonizing raptors for the novel. Ostrom himself is noted with saying that the Velociraptors in Jurassic Park are based on Deinonychus in almost every detail, with only the name being changed. When it came time to adapt Crichton's book to the big screen, Spielberg was originally going to use the name Deinonychus, before again going with the name Velociraptor for the same reasons, specifically because the name sounded more dramatic. Despite this difference, the filmmakers went out of their way to obtain all of Ostrom's published work on Deinonychus for use during production, and the resulting film gave the raptors on screen the proportions and size, as well as the skull and snout shape of the Deinonychus. This is usually where the conversation ends when the Jurassic Park raptors are compared with actual dinosaurs from paleontology in the real world, and the conversation never seems to make it past this point of conjecture. Interestingly enough, that's not the entire story, or the whole truth for that matter. Velociraptor enteropus, and I hope I'm saying that correctly, is a different animal than that of Velociraptor mongoliensis. Despite both creatures being of the same raptor family in a sense, Velociraptor enteropus is more commonly known as Deinonychus enteropus. And the reason I bring this particular classification up is because it's actually addressed in Michael Crichton's original novel. Although nowadays Deinonychus is more directly referenced with that name instead of Velociraptor, there was a time in the late 1980s, which is when the novel was being made, that the dinosaur was referred to as Velociraptor. Despite the long-running talking point of the Jurassic Park raptors being unscientific, if one goes back to Crichton's first novel, every issue and question on the Velociraptor's physical traits is brought forward in dialogue used by the protagonists of the book. When Alan Grant and the others are touring Jurassic Park's nursery, the conversation on raptors is brought forward specifically, with Grant's acknowledgement that the park had bred these dinosaurs that the Doctor had just recently excavated. And Dr. Wu's referral to the creature is addressed as Velociraptor mongoliensis to be exact. Alan asks how exactly Wu knows whether or not the dinosaurs are developing correctly, after stating that no one has ever seen these animals before. Wu smiles and gives a response that he's often thought about that, and finds the work to be a bit of a paradox, and was hoping paleontologists such as Grant would be so kind as to compare the animals to the fossil record in order to verify their developmental sequences. Dr. Sattler ponders why exactly Wu called the Velociraptor they recently saw a mongoliensis, and is given the response that the name was given because of where they found the amber that created the dinosaurs, and that it originated in China. Alan finds this interesting, and reveals that he had just unearthed a juvenile Velociraptor enteropus before coming according to Jurassic Park. After this discussion is held and while the group makes their way to the full-grown raptors, Dr. Grant asks Tim what the boy knows about Velociraptor. Tim gives his response that the animal was a small pack hunter like Deinonychus. Alan reassures Tim that he is correct, but also adds that Deinonychus is now considered to be one of the Velociraptors. And factually speaking, there is a basis for that in the scientific community. Now, as stated before, Deinonychus is rarely ever called Velociraptor in today's day and age, but the two animals are indeed raptors in every way true to the classification. I've brought this particular topic up in the past in previous videos, but I thought it would be a good topic to go over specifically to clear the air on what exactly the raptors in this series are. For all intents and purposes, Velociraptor enteropus are the animals talked about in all forms of Jurassic Park media, and both Michael Crichton and Steven Spielberg's production went out of their way to make this dinosaur as accurate as possible for its presentation in both mediums. Now, the incredible intelligence of the Jurassic Park raptors has never been documented in the scientific community, and there is no such belief that the creatures were that smart in the real world, and other anomalies such as the Dilophosaur's venom and frill, as well as the Tyrannosaur's eyesight, are fabrications made within the Jurassic Park continuity itself. However, Jurassic Park still gets away with this, as well as the lack of feathers on most of the theropods, by explaining how the creatures are brought back, and the hybridization of the DNA in these prehistoric beasts is shown to the audience in the first act of the movie, and early on in the book. That being said, the raptors in Jurassic Park are still not 100% accurate to Deinonychus in some regards, with the animals possessing a slightly larger appearance closer to Utah raptors, and the lack of the aforementioned feathers is a major point of disapproval for some dinosaur fans. Feathers in fact are not entirely absent to this franchise's raptors, however, and I'm not talking about the quills seen in Jurassic Park 3. There actually exists a comic book storyline set on Isla Nublar that features the Velociraptors prominently and also adorns them with fully feathered bodies that we now know the animals did indeed possess. That being said, it is difficult to be exact in any feathered theropod's physical traits due to the animal's feathers usually not surviving the fossilization process. This leaves our interpretation of how many feathers and what they looked like to be generally a guessing game of sorts, and it's one of the reasons I think the film series has kept the dinosaurs scaly instead of feathered in some respects. Now, obviously the main reason they keep the Jurassic Park dinosaurs featherless is because it isn't how the general public experienced these animals when the first few movies were being made, and while reintroducing the franchise after the 14-year break, the filmmakers wanted to make sure the creatures they presented were enjoyable to the viewers as much as possible, and the convenient DNA sequence gaps being filled in the original story was a nice explanation given as to why these creatures are without plumage as of yet. In conclusion, I want to state that the reason I made this video was to explain in full why the argument for the raptors being nothing but fantasy in the movie series is not fully factual. Just as John Ostrom's work on Deinonychus in the 1960s paved the way for the general public's better understanding of dinosaurs, Jurassic Park should also be praised for introducing people to the newly made discoveries on the creatures as well. If not for that first film, barely anyone would know what a raptor was today, and the idea that birds were the descendants of these ancient beings may not have been accepted until much later. I find it incredibly ironic that the Jurassic Park property has been subjugated to much ridicule and disdain by some members of the scientific community, and I think it's important to address every single detail and how specific Crichton addressed the velociraptors he penned in his novels. And leaving out the Anteropus discussion and research both Alan Grant and Michael Crichton himself went through to be the framing of a narrative that in my mind seems to only serve the purpose of making a good headline and has to reject the full truth of the real dinosaurs and Crichton's genetically recreated raptors in order to work. And that's the real reason why the velociraptors are the way they are in Jurassic Park. Now, I want to thank you all for taking the time to watch this video and hope you enjoyed today's content. If you liked what you've seen, I would appreciate the like and hope you consider subscribing so that you can see me again. I'll see you all in the next video, guys, and as always, take it easy.